This is the second regional consultation on prospect challenges to developing action standard and mechanism on the rights of workers. Now we are going to proceed to our first session on protection of the rights of workers, experiences and challenges. In this session, we have the honor from four distinguished keynote speakers. Right now, I would like to introduce you for our excellent moderator for this panel, Dr. Seri Nontasu, the representative of Thailand to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights of Asia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seri Nontasu. Please, sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you for the kind word. I'm not sure if it's going to be excellent, but I'll try. Of course, the speakers are excellent, I have to say. The session, this is the first session of the day. This is on the protection of the rights of workers. We are going to share experiences and challenges, I believe, from the national context, in the hope that at the end of this particular session and also at the end of the day, we'll be able to discuss about how to approach and develop the regional standard. I have with me four speakers. Ms. Melissa Asuncion, the research team from Mahidol University. Melissa will present the study on labor, migration and possible protection mechanisms in ASEAN. On my left, I also have Kun Suntri Sengking from HomeNet Southeast Asia. Kun Suntri will be presenting on informal workers issue. On my right, we have Muhammad Harun or Rashid, and Harun will be presenting, oh by the way, Harun is from Karam Asia. Harun will be presenting on migrant workers issue. And last but not least, we have Mohammed Shafi BP Mamal from ASEAN Services Employees Trade Union Council. And he shared the same name with my colleague from Malaysia as well, who is now the chair of AICHA, and the name of Shafi as well. So it's very good to have the same name. Now, let me begin by saying that the point of discussion is to examine if the national labor protection standards, including existing mechanisms, meet international standards. And the second broad issue is how agencies in the national level have tried to comply rather than comply with international standards and sharing the challenges at the national context, from the national context. So first let me ask Melissa to make a presentation, and Melissa has requested 20 minutes for her presentation. Please be concise, Melissa. I'm sure that it will be very fruitful for us as an introduction. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ajahn Suri. My task is to share with you our research project on the study on labor migration and possible protection mechanisms in ASEAN. And I do this on behalf of the research team composed of Ajahn Sipapapit Nisi, who's here, myself, Joel Mark Barredo is also here, and Nusra Misan, who cannot be here. It's a survey of three countries, Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia, and we also looked at what other regions have in the form of existing laws and mechanisms to promote and protect the rights of migrant workers before we look at the existing labor rights regime in ASEAN, and we end by identifying some initial recommendations on developing and or enhancing the existing mechanisms in ASEAN. I started in the Philippines. Labor migration in the Philippines is implemented as a major socio-economic development strategy, and indeed, the remittances of workers contribute hugely to the gross domestic product. It started out as a temporary solution to increasing unemployment rates in the 1970s, and in the intervening years, it became a more permanent feature of our socio-economic strategy. However, even after opening labor out-migration, unemployment continues to be a serious concern in the Philippines, with the highest rate in ASEAN as of 2014. There are protective domestic legislations in place, and I have to say that they are probably the stronger ones compared to the laws in the region. I have to particularly note the Migrant Workers Act, which is a multi-stakeholder product. It was there, so it has a big contribution from civil society. The Philippines is a signatory to the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers, and it's only 1 out of 3 countries in ASEAN that has ratified the convention. There are government and civil society-led mechanisms in place, and I also want to highlight that in terms of protecting mechanisms, civil society have a lot of programs in place, from manning, having hotlines that migrant workers can call, to having programs to rescue distressed migrant workers. So it's really a combined effort between government and NGOs in the Philippines to address the issues of migrant workers. It has bilateral labor agreements with 20 countries, including 2 ASEAN countries, Indonesia and Laos PDR, which are both sending countries. So we really need to ramp up the effort to have bilateral labor agreements, specifically with receiving countries in ASEAN. While there's a clear policy to promote and protect rights of Filipino migrant workers, these migration policies are softly implemented, and implementation is approached from an economic development orientation rather than a rights-based one. And while there is a strong policy in place, the variance in policies across ASEAN, especially the receiving countries, makes it difficult for us to continue to promote and protect the rights of Filipino migrant workers. Turning now to Thailand. Thailand originally started as a sending country, but then became a net migrant receiving country of workers, mainly from Myanmar, Laos PDR, and Cambodia, and in various industries as well, from agriculture, livestock, fishing, food processing, and manufacturing. It doesn't have a comprehensive law that directly and clearly recognizes the rights of migrant workers. However, it has a number of domestic laws that activists or civil society members are always arguing to be applicable to migrant workers as well. It has signed Memorandum of Understanding with Cambodia, Laos PDR, and Myanmar to establish a formal employment cooperation framework, and it has signed the 4 core ILO conventions, but it has not ratified any of the more substantive international treaties on the protection of the rights of migrant workers. While the legal framework has enough foundation to be protective of migrant workers, there is difficulty in effective monitoring. Law enforcement is still poor, and there's inconsistency of applying the domestic labor protection to migrant workers that have made them vulnerable to discrimination, abuse, and exploitation. The third country in the study is Malaysia. The status, it has a long history with regard to receiving migrant workers, and it remains as one of the largest receiving countries of foreign workers in Southeast Asia. It also has some protective domestic labor legislations, but we have to argue every time that these apply as well to migrant workers. And there are explicit exemptions to particular laws, like the one on minimum wage, which is not applicable to domestic workers, for example. It has not ratified any international convention specific to migrant workers' protection, and instead it pursues the bilateral mode in looking at the situation of migrant workers in the country. Within ASEAN, it has bilateral agreements with Indonesia and Vietnam. What we found in Malaysia is that both structural gaps in individual employer practices drive the vulnerability of migrant workers to abuse and exploitation in almost all major industries. There are 2 main observations in looking at these countries. Number 1 is that if immigration policies are given more importance than labor protection, then it's hard to have a coherent policy to protect migrant workers, because then the priority is securitization instead of labor protection. And there are no effective and accessible grievance mechanism in place. I want to emphasize accessibility, because for sure there are consulates and embassies in all ASEAN countries, but these are mainly in the major cities. And of course, where you find migrant workers, they won't be in the major cities. They would be in kampongs and in villages all over, and it's not very accessible for them to submit their complaint, even assuming that they would be brave enough to submit any complaint. For the other regions, let me just, because I only have 20 minutes, let me just synthesize. In other regions, specifically Europe, Africa, and the Americas, there's a move towards integration that facilitates the movement of peoples and services across countries in the same region. But serious challenges face workers from what they call as third countries, where they enjoy minimal protection in general. There are mechanisms in place. For example, here in the Americas, they have the American Convention on Human Rights, Protocol on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. There's the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. But there are regional laws, regional agreements in place, varying in substance and norms, and there are regional monitoring and protective mechanisms that can be maximized. So it means that still, even in the other regions, there is no specific mechanism for the protection of migrant workers. However, the move is towards acknowledging that migrants have rights, even if there is no explicit instrument that lays down what the scope and extent of these rights are, and that their rights are promoted and protected through whatever existing human rights systems, regardless of their status. For ASEAN, labor migration is certainly not a new phenomenon. It's home to both sending and receiving countries. However, the nature of intra-regional migration is changing. Where previously it was mostly for labor, now there are a number of people migrating due to conflicts, insecurity, human rights violation, and even climate change. And so currently, more than half of the migrants working within ASEAN are in irregular situation. We looked at where the possible avenues are, and looking at the roadmap. For the political and security community, it's more focused on responding to the issue of trafficking in persons, because it looks at people movements from a security perspective. Under the economic community, it focuses on the facilitation of movement of services, but mainly limited to professional and skilled workers. So it's the social-cultural community that has the biggest room to be focusing on the promotion and protection of rights of migrant workers. But so far, there is no clear policy direction on this, and I guess this is our task today. There's still no binding regional documents, specifically in the promotion and protection of rights of workers. However, we have soft law, like ASEAN Declaration Against Trafficking in Persons, ASEAN Declaration on the Protection and Promotion of Rights of Migrant Workers, and then the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, of course. There are also existing mechanisms which we can maximize. We have the AICHR, the ASEAN Commission on the Protection and Promotion of Rights of Women and Children, and then the ASEAN Committee on the Implementation of the ASEAN Declaration on the Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Migrant Workers. So it doesn't mean that we don't have any. There are some, but they are not very much focused on migrant workers. And as Ajahn Siri mentioned earlier, how we respond to the issue of migrant workers as an ASEAN, as ASEAN, is the litmus test for the integration of the ASEAN countries. At this point, let me put on with the permission of my co-researchers, let me put on my NGO hat. I come from Verite, and we're a labor rights group. So just, going into the review of the draft declaration, I just want to share this very quickly. It's a parallel mechanism. What we know probably is the one that is driven by governments. I want to share a parallel mechanism that's happening at the corporate level. So we already know this, how because of globalization, all the sourcing happens not just in one country, but in many countries. And in one country, in many companies. And it goes deeper. One company can be sourcing from multiple suppliers, right? And the suppliers can be based everywhere in Southeast Asia. That's how it is. Now, as I said, what we know is this. The government sends government inspectors to check for minimum compliance with the law, right? We know this. I think this is what's common within the region. However, there's also that thing, that internal or third-party auditors that drive compliance to voluntary codes. And I'm talking about, for example, the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition. So what it means is that Apple, the maker of your iPhone and your Apple computer, would be sourcing with a Malaysian company, for example. And that Malaysian company would be sourcing with maybe 20 more suppliers. So Apple would be sending their internal auditors to check on compliance with their code up to the third or fourth tier of suppliers. That also happens with the palm oil. So there's a multi-stakeholder coalition called Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. It has its own principles and criteria. So, it goes really deep. From brand A, which can be Nestle, they would have to show that the oil that they're sourcing is sustainably produced, and that certification will have to be done under the ambit of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and it goes right down to the nucleus or the main plantation and up to the smallholders or the plasma. So the plasma, the smallholder has to show that it doesn't hire forced or traffic labor, because otherwise it won't get the certification. This is an example of the code. This is 2014. For the EICC, for the electronics industry, the work week limit is 60 hours per week, so that's 6 days. It makes it difficult because in Malaysia, for example, the law allows up to 104 hours of overtime a month. So a company has to not comply with 104, but make sure that it complies with the 60-hour work limit. Another example is non-discrimination. This is my favorite. It just came out. It says non-discrimination on the basis of not only sexual orientation, but also gender identity and expression, covered veteran status, protected genetic information, and even marital status in hiring. Patagonia, the maker of the outwear, I don't know, I don't climb mountains, so I don't know this. But they already said that there is no recruitment fee for hiring migrant workers to Taiwan. And that anything that the worker paid, anything, because it's no fee, so anything that the worker paid had to be reimbursed by the supplier. And workers shall retain possession of identity documents, specifically prohibiting labor brokers and outsourcing agents to hold the worker's identity or personal documents, including passports. Why am I showing all these? I'm showing all these because as we talk about minimum standards, what exactly are we referring to? Are we referring to standards, standards that are dated 1970s or even earlier in the case of the Philippines? Or are we talking about standards that the companies are already implementing within their own global supply chain, which they revisit every year? So, so if the companies are already driving such high standards, as we come in the discourse as ASEAN, where do we position ourselves? Going back to the report, and I only have 2 slides. We identified, as I said, we identified regional level recommendations. The first one has to be the rights-based framework for regional migration policy. It has to be rights-based. It cannot just be any migration policy or migration framework. At the minimum, the ILO, core ILO conventions and commonly ratified international treaties have to be incorporated in the draft. There has to be an accountable labor recruitment and hiring mechanisms, because as we've already established, forced and traffic labor is driven by an obscure recruitment systems. We should also build national capacities to manage labor migration, and the rest of it is there. Just to close, the international standards, and this is me, this is me. You don't think that this is the theme, but this is me as an activist. The international standards are already laid out. No, they're there. They won't go away. So do we start by reiterating what's already written in the international conventions, or do we move forward to have a regionally appropriate mechanism and instrument? I'm not being relativistic. I'm just saying that, after many years of being hurt, that the international conventions only reflect what the first world situation needs. This is our chance to have a regionally appropriate one, and I'm talking about having standards that have to do with outsourced workers, have to do with home workers, informal workers, and of course, women workers and migrant workers. So these are the areas that we have to be looking at, and I hope we'll be able to address some of them as we move forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. That is very excellent, and I'm very much inspired by your presentation. I have to say that over the coffee break, I had a brief discussion with Ajahn Le, who's now going out, but he will be with us. A worrying trend happening in Thailand and other ASEAN member states. I hope that he will have a chance to relate to us later as well. I have some reaction to make immediately after listening to what Melissa presented. Some minor points. First, when we talk about migration, and particularly in ASEAN, migration has become more irregular, and not just for economic purposes. There are other rationales for migration as well. Climate change and conflict are 2 cited examples in Melissa's presentation. Secondly, countries that have no comprehensive policies, and from her examples, it's Thailand and Malaysia, resort to bilateral instruments with their neighbors in terms of formulating migration policies. And thirdly, when Melissa will talk about at the regional level some existing mechanisms and institutions such as the ICHA or the ACMW, I have to say that they are intergovernmental at the moment, but it doesn't mean that we cannot do anything. The ICHA, for example, the organization to which I'm attached, has begun the second thematic study on migration. But sadly to say, it hasn't been concluded. I submitted Thailand's report last year. I thought that it would be Thailand who was the last to submit. It was the first to submit. So we are still waiting for 9 national reports on migration to be compiled and collated. So that's my third point. My fourth point is I'm inspired by what Melissa, the diagram on supply chain. I think when we discuss about migration and the rights of workers, the the other side, or another side, is talking about supply chain and tools such as the principle of CSR as well, which is growing in importance in ASEAN. When we talk about CSR, it is important to stress the fact that it's not just about philanthropy, okay? It's about how you make your money. And I want to, this is not my thinking, but I fully endorse it. Outsourcing of production must never be translated into outsourcing of responsibility and liability. Example, and I hope that Melissa will use more of this example. We heard from the BBC a few days ago about the abolition of bonded servitude by Apple in its firm, in its outsourced firm in China. I hope that that trend will continue. Now, fifthly, when Melissa will talk about rights-based approach, that is very fashionable and very problematic in the same vein. The AICHA, some AICHA representatives still puzzled by the term right-based approach. What does it mean? And I have to explain. Perhaps we can talk more among ourselves as well. And this last point, and the most important one in my mind, is this. At the moment, 3 ASEAN member states subscribe to International Convention on Migrant Workers, and we are developing regional standards. I urge and encourage people here, especially those who have participated in the research, to think about this. When we say we are developing a regional standard, how can those 3 countries that have already subscribed, and by the way, it's not just about International Convention on Migrant Workers, we have plethora of ILO conventions related to labor rights as well. How can those countries that have already been bound by the international standard on labor and workers, especially migrant workers, can subscribe to something that may be a departure from those standards? I'm very worried about the development of the regional standard on workers and migrant workers in particular. So I wish that this issue will be examined in further depth as the day progresses. Okay? So those are my reactions. I use my privilege as the moderator, very much inspired by your presentation, Melissa. Now I give the floor to Kun Suntri from the HomeNet Southeast Asia. She will be presenting on informal workers issue, which is a hot issue in Thailand at the moment. Kun Suntri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ka. This is what? Yeah. Thank you, Ajahn Seri, and good morning, every friend and colleagues. I would like to share with you about the situation and the experience and challenges on protection of the right of informal workers. First thing that I would like to share with you is who are informal workers. Informal workers are workers who work in informal economic sector. And formal or informal economic sector are defined by the content of labor protection law and social protection scheme. So we can say that economic sector that they are in are informal. Informal worker is not born to be informal worker, but it's because of economic sector and the state and the labor protection laws treat them unequal, so that they turn to be informal workers. Informal worker is not a person who born to be informal worker, but because of the state and the labor law turn them to be informal workers. And if we try to define who are informal workers, we will find many groups of workers like a home-based worker that include both self-employed or own account and home worker who do subcontract work. Also street vendor, waste pickers, domestic workers, and workers in service sector like women who run beauty salon, also taxi driver, motorcycle driver, tricycle driver, all of them are informal workers. And in our Thailand, the statistic of our workforce survey, they include farmers, small-scale farmers as an informal worker also. So we will found that informal workers are majority in workforce. Like in Philippines, our friend said that 22.5 million or 75% of the total workforce in Philippines are informal workers. When in my country, in Thailand, 26 million, or we can say 65% of the total employed persons are informal workers. The next point that I would like to share with you is, even now, informal workers are considered as workers, but they still be the second-class worker compared with formal worker. And perhaps the third class of worker are migrant worker, Sammy. You are the third class, I'm the second class. So even among workers, we will find that the state treat as very different, not equal. What is the difference that I said? This slide will I try to do survey that what is the international standard that relate to informal worker issue, and if we do like this, we will find at least ILO Convention number 87 on freedom of association and protection of the right to organize, ILO Convention number 98 about the right to organize and collective bargaining, ILO 177 on homework, ILO 189 on domestic worker, and also the idea or the principle of decent work for all, about creating job, guarantee right at work, extending social protection and promote social dialogue. We will find that the situation of our ASEAN region is the state labor protection laws are lower than these international standards. And this table will show you that about that 4 ILO convention, which country that ratified it already, and which country that's still in silence, a little bit shy, a little bit sad that my country, Thailand, very silent, nothing at all. When some country do some progress already. We found that the ILO Convention number 177 is a blank. All 10 countries didn't ratify, didn't care about it. This is a convention on home workers. Philippines ratified 189. Philippines ratified already. I checked from Wikipedia this morning. They said not yet.
Wikipedia might not be updated.
Kun Sap update that Philippines do it already. Oh. Only Philippines. So it's not my fault, no? It's Wikipedia fault, no? and because of that, so we can say that informal worker is lack of equal access to labor protection law and policy. My example is from my country, from Thailand. We will found that the Labor Protection Act, how to say, not protect. They say in one article that they don't protect the minimum wage for home-based worker and domestic worker, like that. And also, even we have Home Worker Protection Act since 5 years ago, but it don't implement yet. Our Ministry of Labor still do many little things like a draft form of contact and other small ministry regulation. They use 5 years already, but not implement. Even this act is passed our parliament. And another example is about ministry regulation on domestic worker. They protect only leave, annual leave and day off. They don't care about minimum wage or other things. It means that even the convention or the ILO convention or international standard is very progress, but our state is very slow and very passive. I think it's not only my Thailand. I think in other countries it's the same situation is happen. Another thing is informal workers, their lack of access to social protection. Again, according to Thailand case, even we have article number 40 of Social Security Act. This is a special article for informal workers, but they provide only 4 benefits. When formal worker can access 7, so it shows that informal workers still lack of access to proper social protection or equal social protection. Again, lack of right to organize and bargain. Thailand case again, Labor Relation Act. They don't allow informal workers to organize union. If we would like to organize ourselves, we have to organize as an association. And also, informal workers are lack of necessary support from government like us, even skill training, product development, marketing, revolving fund. So they are still poor in economic, in work condition and living conditions. From HomeNet Southeast Asia, we have 5 countries to be our members: Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, and Thailand. The thing that we done or we trying to do, not already yet. We trying to do is to organize the organization, the movement of informal workers, not only home-based workers, informal workers, as a member-based organization. Even the law allow us to organize as an association, but we use the system of trade union. We register our member as a, we can say, member-based organization. And we try to do visibility of informal workers in the region. Also do advocacy on law and policy at each national level. Do advocacy on workers' protection and social protection in ASEAN. The activity that we do is to work with ILO on social protection for concept, like input in drafting declaration of social protection in ASEAN. Now, ASEAN have a declaration on social protection already, and during the drafting time of this declaration, we as a CSO, as a worker movement, we participate in the process. And also, last year we participate in ASEAN People Forum in Myanmar. We organized one workshop on social protection, and the output of the platform is a statement, and in that statement we have one or two sentences mentioned on social protection of workers. This is my last slide. My last slide is about ASEAN challenges. I didn't say that informal worker challenges. These challenges is ASEAN challenges. At the national level, I mean 10 country member of ASEAN must extend labor law to protect all kind of workers. Not only migrant worker. I think not only migrant worker, but formal worker, informal worker, women workers, all of us are suffer in economic development, suffer because of free trade area together. So 10 member states of ASEAN have to extend labor law to protect all kind of workers. And all kind of workers ought to access the same standard of protection. And that standard must not lower than international standard. And at the ASEAN level, I think that is the time for ASEAN to set our own standard to protect the right of all kind of workers, not only migrant workers. And this standard must not lower than international standard. That is all my present.
Thank you. Thank you, Kun Suntri, for her very good presentation. Apart from the news on ISIS lately, I recently found a piece of information. I don't recall where the source is now. Do you know what is the worst job in the world? And there's a coverage yesterday or the day before. It's actually, and from what Kun Suntri presented, her illustrative list of who constitute informal workers, the worst job in the world is now the sewage drainer, sewage cleaner in Bangkok. You can Google it and find, the coverage there. And they take a photograph of a man in the ground cleaning sewage and smiling, of course, this being from Thailand. but it's the worst job in the world. So that underlines what Kun Suntri just presented. Now, I'm just picking up some elements and I want to highlight them. The first is the existing discrimination and inequality between informal and formal workers. The second, and this is rather a question, perhaps Kun Suntri or some of you would discuss this later. She urged that domestic workers or informal workers should enjoy the rights and benefits. I agree in principle, but some minor question about how to. For example, the unionization of domestic workers, as a technical question, how can we promote that kind of right, as regards mechanism to promote unionization of domestic workers? We don't know who they are, they're kept at home. How can we actually promote them to come out, employers to subscribe to the notion? Lastly, and most importantly, and this is underscored, and it underscores the point previously made by Melissa as well. What is the merit or the benefit of ASEAN member states subscribing themselves to the newly or soon to be established regional standard, where they can always tag along or subscribe to international standards? Is it the way to get out of the more stringent standards at the international level? Of course, we cannot let that happen. And the challenge is how we can convince the government. Because whenever we establish or develop a regional standard, a pertinent question is, to what extent it will be on par or higher than the existing international standard. That was present also when we negotiated the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. Okay, so I think that's a very pertinent question that should be discussed further. Now, the third speaker in my session is Harun, and Harun, you would be using, perhaps, can we switch the seat? Now everyone is switched. The country is here. Harun over there. Harun again will focus on migrant workers. The file is not migrating, I hope. Is that the one? Go ahead, Harun.
Okay. I would like to thank the organizer to invite Karam Asia to be one of the panel speakers to speak on migrant workers issues. Of course, Karam Asia is a regional organization. We work throughout Asia regions, both in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. So we work especially on migrant workers issue throughout the regions. So I'll give you the regional perspective on migrant workers issues, and especially the ASEAN mechanism. I'm going straight to the declaration. Okay, what's happening with the ASEAN declaration that took place in Philippines in 2007? Okay, the positiveness of this declaration in 2007 is that the head of the state actually took a lead to come up with this declaration with a positive sign that they care about the migrant workers' issues in the region. Okay. Now, what happened after that? Sorry, so slow. Okay. Declaration is fine. There's no problem, except that point they mentioned that which was very wrong in terms of undocumented workers. Other than that, the declaration was fine, but they actually specifically exclude the undocumented workers from the declaration itself. So how can you come up with a declaration without having a set of workers which is not on their own fault? You see, undocumented. You see, nobody wants to be undocumented. That's for sure. Okay? Everybody wants to be legally documented, having legal papers with them, and then migrate. So that was the major problem with the declaration itself. So that's why Sami here, who is also will be agreed that whenever they are discussing, because that was the head of the state, but the official, senior official from the labor ministry, when they discuss for the instrument on the migrant workers, this undocumented issue comes over and over, and until 2015, from 2007 to 15, they could not agree on anything because of certain clause in the declaration. Okay? Now, 2015, this is the year supposed to be the last year of this instrument. And this is the last year globally on Millennium Development Goal. We are starting a post-Millennium Development Goal from next year. So the ASEAN member states need to remind themselves, or the people of ASEAN need to remember that this is the last year and we are finishing also the instrument. Now how do we move from here? Okay? We have moved as a regional organization with our national partner from the region, including the task force convener, from country to country. And last year was in Myanmar. This year would be in Malaysia. So how do we move from there? Now, as I mentioned already, the positiveness of it. Yes, we agree that ASEAN member states started this mechanism, okay, on migrant workers issues, okay, to protect and promote the rights of migrant workers, okay. Interestingly, I want to mention here that among the countries, okay, what they say that they want to build up a caring and sharing society among the ASEAN member states. Now, here again, what comes up is good,